Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football, an abbreviated episode of Joe Patrick on Football tonight because, well, it was supposed to be a trade deadline recap, and the Falcons did not do anything. Now, that's not necessarily surprising, and in fact, if you were to ask me, the fan in me, and I did grow up a Falcons fan. If anybody is wondering, I'm from here, raised here. Um, not displeased that they didn't do anything. Was a little concerned at one point that this team might try to go out and trade for a receiver when it certainly looked like a couple weeks ago they were really struggling in that department and obviously had some injuries with what Drake London was going through. Darnell Mooney hadn't really kind of caught up, but ultimately with where this team is right now at 3-5, and only the most important part is the fact they only have 5 picks right now going into next year's draft, and that obviously includes not having a first rounder. Did not really want this team personally to give any more draft assets away, and clearly I think the team was of the same mindset. They did not do anything where they probably felt like they needed some pieces, and that was reflected in some of the things they did outside of the trade deadline. But we'll talk about that in just a second. Did just want to kind of go through some of the craziness that happened today because it really was a trade deadline in the NFL that had all these moves. Kirk Cousins not moved, obviously, if the Falcons didn't do anything. Didn't sell any players either. We should say. Arnold Ebiketie also stays. So some of these names that we thought could potentially be on the move, everybody's staying for the Falcons. They're standing pat. The Jets really were the big name or the big team, the big mover on the day, and for them, it's just kind of dismantling that team, and in particular, that defense, which was. Had a couple star players on it that are now going to be playing elsewhere. Sauce Gardner moved to the Indianapolis Colts for 2 first-round picks. Wow, that is a massive trade. I can't remember an in-season trade, especially one that happens right at the deadline that's been that big in recent memory. I haven't read anything yet online about any of the reaction to it, so I don't know if anybody's mentioned anything that comes close to it recently, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. And then also Quinnen Williams goes to the Cowboys, which is an interesting one, considering where the Cowboys are at currently. I believe they're 3-5-1 right now. That's exactly the kind of trade I wouldn't want to be making. I don't even remember though what they gave up, so we'll see. We'll see. The Falcons also didn't really have any like salary cap space to take players on who, where teams might be willing to get rid of salary and not really cost, players wouldn't cost much in terms of draft capital, but it's mostly in getting the salary off the books. Falcons didn't really have that luxury available to them, and I know that there is obviously going to be money that comes free for the Falcons here, probably after the season with Kirk Cousins, although there could potentially still be some dead cap to eat there for the Falcons, but obviously not to the extent of what Kirk is costing them this year. But that money is going to be plowed right back into the players who are currently on this roster when it comes to Drake London, Bijan Robinson. Kyle Pitts is a really, really interesting story. I mean, he's been one of the primary pass catchers for the team this year. And I'll be honest, heading into this season, I kind of was thinking that there's no way that Kyle Pitts comes back next year. Now I'm wondering if not. I don't think that they would do a long-term contract still just because of the inconsistency, but potentially with could a franchise tag be on the cards for a player like Kyle Pitts? At tight end, it's not as expensive for the team, so that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have down the road. But ultimately, they are going to have to put salary cap money back into signing some of these long-term contracts. And of course, Michael Penix is going to come down the road, but really with all these star players that the team has drafted on that offensive side of the football, they're going to have to pay a pretty penny to get those guys on long-term contracts, and there's no reason to think that with Drake, Bijan, and obviously Penix that won't be the case for those guys to stay around long-term. So not a whole lot for the Falcons to really work with asset-wise in this trade deadline, which is why they didn't really make a splash. One of the other ones that I think is a really good deal for the Seattle Seahawks was getting Rashid Shaheed in from the New Orleans Saints. The Saints actually get a good return in that one as well, getting a 4th and 5th round pick back, which, I think the Falcons would have loved something like that for some of their players, but ultimately not the case as we talked about. But I think Shaheed is a really nice piece to add to Jackson Smith and Jigba there, and that Sam Darnold passing attack, which is absolutely firing on all cylinders at this point in time out there in Seattle. They're a real threat. So that should be fun to see how that plays out. But obviously a pretty big move there, and it's also just interesting to see how the NFL trade deadline, it feels like the last several years, has really kind of increased its well, I guess the willingness that teams have to do deals in this time frame. And I think one of the reasons why you don't tend to see tons of trades in the NFL is because it's not a sport that is as conducive to kind of plug and play players, in certain situations. Now, at some positions, it's obviously more feasible. Like if you're a offensive lineman, a corner, for example, with Sauce Gardner, where it's like you can come in and kind of do a job, guarding a guy in man coverage, or obviously you kind of already have an understanding of some basic concepts. But with the contracts the way they are and how tactical the game is and how important how much like players are formed by the tactics under which they're playing, and kind of like to go into like a new offense, for example, like a wide receiver going into a new offense can be difficult. So I think that's one of the reasons why you don't see trades happen in football like they often happen in sports like baseball, basketball, etc. And there's also an injury aspect where players get injured a lot more, obviously, in football, and so therefore I think there's a risk adjustment that has to be made on like how how willing are we to take a gamble knowing that a player could get injured in any given week and not even be available for us with fewer games that are ultimately being played in the sport, so compared to some of these others. So anyway, just an interesting trade deadline that went down. But let's get into what the Falcons did, and they did make some interesting moves that I wonder if it could signal something, which we might know more about by the time that many of you are listening to this. Obviously, I'm recording it late Tuesday evening. By the time this comes out, it might already be Wednesday. And we will have talked to Raheem Morris at that point about some updates on some of these key injuries that the team is potentially facing as they head into Germany. And we're going to talk in this just at the end of this about the itinerary that the team has this week, because it will be a bit different. And I think it's worth just kind of putting it out there because it's a challenge that both teams are going to have to overcome. But the big one is the Falcons add a tackle in Andrew Stueber. He's 6'7", 338 is what he's listed. I saw him kind of being referred to as like a tackle guard combo, but I don't know. At that size, at 6'7", it's hard for me to imagine he's going to play anything but tackle. Stueber did participate with the Falcons in training camp throughout the entirety of their training camp last season, before he then went on to play, I believe, in 8 games for the Bengals last year, which is where the Falcons got him from their practice squad. So there is some scheme familiarity that Stueber will have with, Dwayne Ledford, the team's offensive, or I should say run game coordinator and offensive line coach. So there is that. I will say I was not impressed with him really whatsoever. When he was in camp. To me, he's got kind of and this is a little weird when you start getting into evaluating players and especially their physiques, but I will just say, like, his lower body seemed kind of like not very developed, I would say, like not a strong lower half. And and for that reason, I feel like he's just kind of physically awkward in the way he moves. And so, frankly, I'm not really expecting much from Andrew Stueber, but I kind of worry for this situation because of what it potentially signals. If the Falcons were willing to go out and sign a tackle from another team's practice squad, that puts Andrew Stueber on the 53-man roster. And what does that then mean for Matthew Bergeron and Chris Lindstrom, who were injured in the New England game against the Patriots on Sunday and did not finish that game? And also, there's another name out there who we thought was going to be potentially playing in that Patriots game, but he was held out. Storm Norton, coming back from an injury he suffered early on in training camp. And he had an interesting roster or injury report listing this week, or last week, I should say, which was that he was full participant, full participant, full participant. And then on the Friday, he was a DNP and then was listed out. They were not, going to have him travel to New England. And it listed as a foot. I don't know. I should have looked this up before I started this show, what his injury had been labeled going into it. I'm sure it probably was foot as well. It had been described previously and reported on as an ankle injury. I believe it was Adam Schefter who initially reported the ankle injury for Storm Norton, and that kind of came out right as the Caleb McGarry injury news was happening as well. So it was kind of a double whammy at that point. But don't know if that DNP that Storm Norton had at the end of that was a new injury potentially that could have happened during one of the practices in which he was a full participant. So some things that we'll be getting some more information from on Raheem Morris on that front. Of course, he didn't give any indication as to the status of these players when he was asked. Well, he wasn't asked about Storm, but for Bergeron and Lindstrom, didn't give any indication as to the severity of their injuries in his Monday press conference. I don't think we've gotten any significant injury updates from Raheem Morris on a Monday yet this season. If I'm right about that, yeah, I think that's probably strategic because Tuesday is a day where coaches really get the game plan done of what they're going to try to do that week, and then obviously building their practices and their practice plans throughout the week on that Tuesday that they have off. And so I think that Raheem Morris probably just doesn't want to kind of show any of his cards that he doesn't really have to until Wednesday. And who knows, by the time we talk to him on Wednesday, these players, he probably would still say that they're just kind of like questionable, up in the air, day to day, week to week, like that kind of thing. That's kind of what we've heard from Raheem Morris. They've played at Coy, but I think the practice, obviously how much they practice is going to be the best indication of these players' health and their availability to play. And so, if Bergeron's out, Storm Norton's, let's leave Storm out of it because that's kind of more me. I don't know what's actually real there. And again, we'll find out more information. But if Bergeron's out, Lindstrom's out, then potentially, you have a void at guard. At both guards at that point. And so why sign a tackle? Well, you have Elijah Wilkinson playing right tackle, and you can bump him into a guard spot. I think they're pretty comfortable playing Kyle Hinton at one of the other guards. They really like Hinton. Hinton is, again, kind of like I described Stueber earlier. He's not super versatile. In fact, I noticed, I think it was his first play when he came into the game to replace Matthew Bergeron. He got beaten really bad on a pass rush where he just doesn't really have the length, and the guy was able to basically beat him without that defensive lineman ever getting touched. I don't remember what lineman it was for the Patriots, but Penix got a pass off quickly before the rush ever actually got to him, but it was a clean win by that Patriots guy. And so that's something, that's just Hinton's a mauler. He's huge. He's got these like massive traps, and he's just like a big, strong guy in there, which, hopefully you can maybe run the ball behind him a little bit. But, I think he's got some clear weaknesses, especially in pass protection. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that's the reason you sign the tackles, because you have the idea of bumping Elijah Wilkinson back inside to play right guard or left guard, whichever one they prefer. I know Wilkinson was a starter at left guard for the Falcons when he last played here in 2022. And I know that Hinton has kind of played both sides, so they could flip them back around that way or just slide Wilkinson in one spot since he has been playing on the right side. Those things will kind of get settled during the course of the week, I'm sure. But I would imagine that is the reason why they went out and signed a player like Stueber, because he has the familiarity with them. Would it be able to pick up a playbook? I mean, to me, this signals that he could definitely be playing potentially in this game. Or at least active for the game. And he's going to. I mean, he is on the the active roster essentially. Now they could make him inactive on game day, but again, given the fact that this is the guy they went out and signed, to me it signals that they kind of need somebody that's ready to play right now, which is concerning for this team. The other big news for the Falcons today, and maybe bigger news for a lot of people, was the fact that they waived Parker Romo, who missed the obviously potential game-tying extra point after touchdown on Sunday, and they signed kicker Zane Gonzalez, a different profile of kickers here, I would say, at least in their playing experience. These two guys, Zane Gonzalez has been playing since 2017, has now been out of football for like 3 of the last 4 years. just not, kind of lost a spot. Obviously, if you're getting picked up as a kicker at this point, you are kind of a journeyman. You've been around, and you're obviously not at the level where a team has clearly wanted you to this point. So he's been out of football for a little bit. Would say that his career numbers don't inspire a ton of confidence. He's missed a point after touchdown himself every year, at least one every year of his NFL career. So if that trend holds up, then brace yourselves because there could be another one. To me, and it looks like to me, and I had his stuff pulled up, and now I've lost where it is in my tabs, but does not have a really particularly strong accuracy in general, but particularly from 50 yards out. And obviously that's going to be natural, but I would think that his 50-plus yard accuracy is probably worse than you see from a lot of players around the NFL. He did seem pretty accurate from what I saw from like in 49 in, which I think frankly is what the Falcons are looking for, and I think that's important to just note that NFL experience that he has. I think that that's something that they felt like they wanted in the next kicker that comes in. Romo was not a kicker who had much experience. We obviously talked about him having kicked for the Vikings last year, but that was on a part-time basis while I believe they had an injury or something that so he just kind of came in for a few games and kicked for them. So they get a more experienced kicker now in Zane Gonzalez, and hopefully he can do a good job. But I wouldn't say I'm expecting it. And I think that, that's when you're in the kicking doldrums, I mean, it doesn't get better until it's better. It's never going to feel like it's solved until you start to not think about it. But, I think a lot of Falcons fans are going to assume that kicks are going to be missed or it's going to be a dicey situation. And that's going to, I think, affect the way that Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson call plays and make decisions in key parts of the field, and depending on the down and distances. So we'll see. Ben Sauls was also on this roster on the practice squad, another kicker, rookie kicker out of Pitt. He was waived. Would not be surprised to see him come back as well at some point. To me, this kind of screams of like kind of roster management when you're adding Stueber and then you got to waive some guys. Obviously, Romo was one that was waived, but I think that this is probably just roster management. Would not be surprised if Sauls is kind of back on the practice squad at some point. Interesting that they didn't just go to him. You would think that, with all the kickers they've worked out over the last several weeks, that they would have felt like Sauls is like the second best guy that they've seen, and that's why he was on the practice squad. And so if you're not going to go with Romo, you go with Sauls. But again, Sauls is a rookie. Romo didn't have much experience. Zane Gonzalez has quite a bit of experience as far as free agent kickers go. So I have to think that was kind of a primary importance for them when they were looking at the replacement. And then also, interestingly, they did add a long snapper to the practice squad. Liam McCullough he got a contract extension with the team. He's currently the team's long snapper. Wondering why. Wondering if there's potentially a small injury that McCullough is dealing with, or has the snaps been contributing? Has there been snapping issues that have been contributing to kicks? I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know that enough about kicking, or I haven't paid enough attention to the kicks. I did long snap in high school. That's about it. So anyway, let's get into the itinerary for this team, because this is kind of interesting, especially if you're weird like me. So they'll start their normal kind of practice week tomorrow. Tomorrow being Wednesday. Wednesday, they'll practice about an hour earlier. That is scheduled to be a 1 p.m. practice start. And by the way, before I say all this is all just kind of like, none of this is like written in pen. So this stuff can change, but this is a general gist of what the plan is for now. So they'll practice about an hour earlier on Wednesday. They'll have a 1 p.m. practice compared to a 2 p.m. practice. And by the way, if you follow along with media stuff, Michael Penix will not speak tomorrow. They're going to wait and kind of have a lot of their players talk when they're out there in Germany for the German media. So I believe the only kind of people that we'll talk to in the media outside of like locker room stuff will be like coaches. Will be Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson, Jeff Ulbrich, Marquise Williams. There might be guys we get on from locker room, but the big podium players that you would normally see, Jesse Bates, Michael Penix, those guys will speak out in Germany, along with I think 4 other players that have been identified. So 1 hour earlier on Wednesday. Then Thursday, they will practice at 10:40 a.m. There will be some media that happens after that. but then I would guess the flight is probably going to leave somewhere between 4 and 5 p.m. local time. I looked it up, and it looks to me like it's about a 9-hour flight over there to Germany where they're going. So that puts them. Let's assume they leave it at 5 p.m. tomorrow, or I'm sorry, on Thursday. Which is, by the way, the whole thing is interesting that they're not going out there earlier. That they are doing it like this. I'm not sure what the Colts plan is. I would think the Colts are probably doing something similar, but I know that teams previously, when they've been playing in Ireland or England or wherever, like they've kind of seen. I think they've gone out like more ahead of time than this. So they'll practice Thursday at 10:40 a.m. and then leave on the flight by 5 p.m. 9-hour flight puts them wheels down in Germany around 2 a.m. our time. But interesting. So 2 a.m. our time will be 7 a.m. their time. So while it's a 9-hour flight, you're also losing 5 hours going out, eastward. So they will basically get off the flight and have a 9 a.m. practice. They'll get off the flight at like 7 a.m. or whatever. They'll probably go to their hotel, drop off their bags, get a little bit to eat, start to do some mobility work, and then they'll practice at 9 a.m. Now, that 9 a.m. practice is probably going to be quite light, I would imagine. Definitely some injury precautions you got to have when you've just been kind of on a long flight, and then you're trying to do something active with regards to muscle pulls and stuff like that. So they'll have to kind of be careful with that, but they will, I imagine, just go right off the, sleep as much as you can on the plane, but then get off the plane, drop off your stuff, get ready for practice, and then you have a practice, and then they will probably, they'll probably try to stay up as long as they can. I guess that's the way that you do it when you travel like that. You probably just try to fight through the sleepiness and then get to bed at a good hour on Friday night, and then kind of get yourself reset. They're off on Saturday, and then Sunday, the game will be at 2:30 p.m. local time for them, 9:30 a.m. for us as well. My pregame show, the Wade Ford Tailgate Show on 99 The Game, will be starting at 5:30 a.m. So I'm already bracing myself for that. So, anyways, thanks you guys for listening to the show or watching us. If you're watching us on YouTube, on 99 The Game's YouTube channel, thank you guys so much. Click a like if you want to see more of these in your algorithm. Get fed to you. So thank you so much. We'll be back again later in the week to kind of try to put a bow on some of these injuries and give you a fuller preview of what to expect as this team tries to keep itself afloat against one of the most difficult tests you could basically have right now in the NFL against the Indianapolis Colts. So we will talk to you then.